The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Hello, I'm Eric Olson, President and CEO of KSMQ Public Television, and welcome to this special roundtable discussion, Nonprofit, No Problem. We're doing this in conjunction with the Austin Area Foundation, a wonderful local organization that helps many nonprofit groups get information, get a hold of resources so that they can be successful. During this hour, you're going to talk with experts in the field who are right here in Austin, and we're also going to go out in the field to talk with folks who have successfully started their own nonprofit business to learn a little bit about what they went through during the process to make their organization successful today. And I want to introduce now our guests that are joining us here on our program. To my immediate left is Steve Hovey, Austin attorney. Welcome, Steve. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Across from me is Ron Wolf, CPA in Austin.
Good morning.
Hi. And also Mike Ruzek, local health insurance agent and also a leader of Austin Area Foundation. All of these gentlemen part of the foundation. Welcome, Mike, to you.
Hi.
Also. And thanks for sharing your expertise. This is a complicated issue that's really born, and Mike, I can start with you, really kind of born out of a nonprofit organization comes about because in many cases a person has a passion for something, an organization or a good cause, and they need help. They need resources to operate it like a business. Is that some of the folks you run into?
That's right. People come and say, well, how do I do this? And I got this idea. Hopefully they have some other people that embrace the same passion that they have. And then we help them, with the Austin Area Foundation, we can help them say, well, there are some resources that you need to do and so forth. And they get going. Mm-hmm. And there's over 130 nonprofit organizations in Mower County, and they do a tremendous job in filling needs, entertainment, educational efforts, and so forth. So
yeah. We're going to talk to two of them later in the hour. The dog park folks in Austin, and also the Veterans Memorial downtown, which was a very long-term project. It went for many, many years before it finally came to fruition. Steve, what about the legalities? Let's go back and just talk. Why do we have nonprofits? Why are they formed? Why are they important?
Well, the reason they're important is, as Mike mentioned, in a for-profit world, your idea is you're generating revenues that will flow to the owners, to the shareholders, to the owner of the company. In the nonprofit world, you try to develop those same revenues, but you spend those revenues on your cause, on the dog park, on community foundation, on rebuilding a community ball field. What's important when you develop one of these causes, if you have this idea that you want to create a nonprofit that's going to better your community, you need to get off on the right foot. You need to get your organization formed correctly so that it will function in the way that you want, accomplish the mission that you have for the organization, and will continue to run smoothly even perhaps after the original organizers or people involved in the formation of the organization have long since passed or have gotten out of it.
And that's a good point. Ron Wolf, I want to ask you about this. Do many folks think of a nonprofit, but they think about the cause first before the business part of it? That is, it's a group of volunteers and they're excited, but then after the fact, hey, we've got to organize and this is getting big, we need help.
Yeah, it's quite common after they get up. Actually, it's after they get up and running for a while, they start thinking or become aware of the fact that they have a lot of responsibilities, filing requirements, And not all, just because you're a nonprofit does not mean that you're tax exempt.
Really? Say a little more about that.
Well, there are 26 different classes of, excuse me, 501c organizations.
Which are the tax exempt?
Right. And there are also another 6 exempt from 501 sections. Now, the holy grail, so to speak, is the tax exempt public charity, which is a 501c3 organization. And there are filing requirements, organizational requirements, operating requirements. One of the most basic is that you can't be an individual or a partnership cannot be an exempt organization. After that, if you're looking at for the true tax exempt person or organization, you must be organized for one of the purposes of public charity, religious, charitable, public safety, scientific, literacy, fostering amateur sports.
So there are specific categories, types of organizations or causes.
Right, such as veterans facilities, you've got schools, you've got churches. It's all defined within those 34 different categories of nonprofits.
My goodness. So Mike, the key is for the viewers out there thinking, I have a very important project that I would like to pursue. It's to think about these things before there are problems and they have to seek out larger solutions, to think these things through beforehand. You have a lot of tools at the foundation, I know, to help folks when they're making these kinds of decisions.
Well, one of the first problems they run into is the financial resources to actually create the structure in which they were going to operate. And so they need to have a charter with the state of Minnesota, and they need to, file with the IRS. And this process can take quite a long time. In the meantime, they don't have money. And so the Austin Area Foundation can actually receive tax deductible donations on their behalf to cover those expenses while they're going through the process of getting that 501c3 organization. And that's been very helpful. And we also can direct them to people like attorneys and CPAs and so forth that can help them with that structure. And then we have, we've been able to help them as far as what you need in bylaws and so forth. But the attorneys and the CPAs can help them with that also.
And another big problem, or challenge, opportunity, I guess you would say, is that, Steve, am I correct that most of these folks are volunteers who have other lives? They're working full-time, and so they're not necessarily always focused on these issues.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, this is not typically their employment or their area of expertise. It's simply a cause that they believe in. And to build on what Mike said, it's very important early on in the development of your organization to consult with an attorney or a CPA or people who have gone through this before at a minimum, so that you know how you set your structure up and what are the steps that you have to follow. One of the first things that we would tell people is form a nonprofit corporation in the state of Minnesota. It's relatively simple to do. You prepare articles of incorporation. They contain basic information about your organization, what the name is, who the organizers are, even maybe who the original board members might be. And you file those articles with the Secretary of State, which then presents to you a certificate of organization. Now you have your structure. Next step, you get an original board or an initial board and have those people develop the rules the organization is going to follow.
Is that bylaws? Is that,
bylaws?
Is that another word for that?
That'd be exactly right. That would be the legal term for it. And these are the rules that the organization will follow in terms of electing its board members, you know, what members can and cannot do in the organization, who your officers are going to be, you know, what types of committees you want, whether it's fundraising or distribution or any committee that you think might benefit your organization. Put those rules in place, and then you start developing policies, the policies that you want your volunteers to follow, the policies that you want your board members to follow. And when you have that structure then in place, that will help you go to the next step, which is, you know, to do the tax filings and to decide how are you going to go about raising funds or associating with organizations like the Austin Area Foundation.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about fundraising too later, but I thought it was interesting, Ron. It's my first opportunity just in a year here leading a nonprofit. I've had a lot of other commercial television experience, but it's new. And there are so many things that one would not think about when talking about, for instance, what you can and can't do, that on the surface would seems reasonable to me, but there's a good reason for why there are rules, especially in the finance world, about making sure that you have proper procedures in place to operate the nonprofit properly.
Yeah, there are a lot of rules and regulations out there, but basically it comes down that a public charity is to be organized and operated so that there isn't any private inurement of any benefit.
Okay, inurement. There's there's a word there. There's a word. So,
well, for the
benefit
of a private individual, and it includes more than just the building, the real estate, the property. It also includes the money, the funds that you're invested. You can't be a public charity if you're benefiting a particular individual. And that's one of the big lapses that they have in their articles of incorporation, that it must be specifically stated that the assets of the corporation are permanently dedicated to charities, so that if they fold the organization, all the assets, including the cash, must be given to another charitable organization.
Okay. And also, we talk about when funds come into an organization, who's responsible? Is the one person doing all of the cash handling? Those kinds of, I don't know what you would call that, but those kind of chain of command issues.
Well, it's just like in any other business. While the person handling it might be the one actually perpetrating, say, the crime, it's actually the board that's charged with the oversight. The board's responsibility is to make sure that that person isn't given the opportunity to create that act.
Mm-hmm. And we're certainly not saying that that would normally happen, but it sometimes can be innocently if you don't know all the regulations, and things can happen and you're not really aware of it.
Yeah, and depending on what it is, you always run the risk that you may lose your tax-exempt status, which means you have to get rid of everything contributed to the charity and then go back and start all over again.
Well, we have, as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, you're watching Nonprofit No Problem, brought to you by the Austin Area Foundation and folks here at KSMQ Public Television. And we have 3 different little mini stories, we're calling them success stories, of nonprofits in the region that have a story to tell. And our first one is a fascinating fellow, William David Fuller of the Veterans Memorial. Let's listen to his story.
My name is William David Fuller. I'm from Austin, Minnesota here. This project was started by me back in 1988. We began running around the county and trying to get people to donate to our cause, a memorial for the veterans of Mower County. One of the biggest obstacles was getting the nonprofit status, because you have to go through a lot of ups and downs with the IRS, and they send it back to you for more information. You have to submit the information by a certain date, and eventually things started rolling along, and it became a reality. So it's a lot of paperwork. And again, it's back and forth to the IRS, calls on the phone to get the number, and then keeping the number active. because I kept the number active for a few years when the project went dormant. And then when it was ready to go, the number was there and we could proceed forward. It's hard enough to get the nonprofit in the first place, and to continue on to get the development of the memorial. It took a lot of people and a lot of time to get combined and to get the urge to go forward and complete it.
William David Fuller there in the Vets Memorial, certainly a beautiful addition to downtown Austin, but a very interesting point that he made, and it's something that I thought of, that in this day of the internet and instant online applications for things, this is a process that, as he tells it, went on for a long period of time, Steve, so you have to kind of keep your eye on the ball.
You do. It's the process of applying for 501c3 status and establishing that you are in fact going to be a public charity as opposed to a private foundation takes years. I mean, there's I think an initial 5-year period in which you have to kind of get up and running and to show that you're going to make it. But it's absolutely, it's not something that if you think you're going to form a nonprofit corporation and have a 501c3 organization that's going to be able to accept, tax-exempt donations, that you're going to be able to do that in 4 months' time. That's simply not going to happen. That's why it's important, if you have an immediate need to get your organization going and you've got a potential source of funds that, people who want to donate money to you, that you can collaborate with an organization like the Austin Area Foundation or another organization that is currently up and running and in existence to kind of help you during this transition period.
And Mike, what about that? In Mr. Fuller's case, he mentioned that this went on for, his project was decades in the making, and he said it went away for a little while and came back. So there are what it sounded like are benchmarks you need to follow to keep a nonprofit moving.
Well, that's right. There's certain registration requirements that have come into place, recently. In regards to the Veterans Memorial, that project was over and done with, but they kept their 501c3 status. The product was not, or the memorial was not quite finished, and so the Austin Area Foundation then teamed up with the Veterans Memorial in 2009 to finish the project and help them raise money and did the administrative work for them. And that kept them active also.
What about raising money? You mentioned on it, Ron. Are there different rules that nonprofits need to think about relating to the type of fundraising, such as if you want to hold a raffle or I don't know, just a charitable event, or pay admission at the door for a music concert, for example? Are there different restrictions on those types of fundraising activities?
Yes to all of it. Raffles it's a form of gambling, therefore it's very restrictive, very organized, a lot of requirements. For instance, hold a raffle, you have to be a fraternal, religious, veterans, or other nonprofit organization just to begin with.
Oh, there's specific, those are specific
Those are the
ones.
people that can only have a legal raffle.
Okay.
If you have groceries or gross prizes below $1,500 for the year, you don't have to apply. Once you reach $1,500, you have to submit a form to the state, which gives you a permit to carry on up to 5 days of gambling per year. At the point in time, under that permit, you are only allowed to give total aggregate prizes of $50,000. Otherwise, you have to get a permanent gambling. Then your tickets have to be sequentially numbered. They have to have the name and identifying information, the address or phone number on the recipient, specific number, the list of at least the top 3 prizes, the date and when the prizes are given, all of that. Then you've got reporting after that.
So we should say these are different from, I might be in some retail store and it's like fill out your name and throw it in the basket.
Yeah, you
That's
pay
a
sales
different-
tax and you quit.
Right.
Gambling and nonprofits, the other big thing you've got on nonprofits is if you have, let's say, well, the raffle is a good one. None of your raffle tickets are tax deductible because, like a banquet, say you charge $35 for a banquet ticket. The going fair market value of that meal that you received is $25. That $25 is considered revenue to the organization. The remaining $10 is the donation, and your deduction is limited to $10.
Ah.
In a raffle, the fair market value of the chance to win the prize is considered the price of the ticket. So therefore, raffle tickets you do not get a tax deduction for.
Right, it's similar to, here at KSMQ, sometimes we will have pledge drives and we'll offer a DVD or some product, and that's, we have to keep track of those. That's a
Right.
separate, it's not a tax benefit for that value of that
Correct.
product.
Right.
Okay. So is there an easier, less restrictive way for a nonprofit to, have a fundraiser of some type? Are there other forms?
Just an appeal drive. Yeah, if you're giving something to a nonprofit or a tax-exempt unit without any expectation or receipt of any benefit, be it a meal, being a chance to win, or a DVD, the entire amount becomes deductible. In the case of KSMQ, even if you are offering the DVD and you would like to write off the entire contribution, you can refuse the gift. Then it becomes totally deductible.
Did you hear that out there? No, just kidding. And we're very thankful that you're watching our program, Nonprofit, No Problem, here on KSMQ Public Television, brought to you by the Austin Area Foundation and KSMQ. My guest, Steve Hovey, Austin attorney, Ron Wall, CPA, and Mr. Mike Ruzek, health insurance rep here in town and also with the Area Foundation. All these gentlemen serve in the capacity, and thank you for your service. We just got done with a bunch of roundtable discussions for the candidates, and we have to thank them too, because this is outside the realm of your work. This is service work, and certainly is appreciated. Mike, is there a garden variety nonprofit, a person that comes to a foundation such as yours for assistance? What kind of service can you provide them?
Well, once we had talked a little bit about, someone who wanted to start up, a 501c3, and how we can help them. Established organizations, we can also help them. A lot of times they're pretty successful and they have a reserve fund, and they don't know how to invest it and so forth. They maybe want to set it up for long-term future use with an endowment fund, and community foundations can serve the function of having reserve funds from nonprofit organizations by setting up an endowment fund on behalf of that organization, and where the earnings off of that can go to the nonprofit organization, year after year. And so as a community foundation, we can work with any 501c3 organization. And a lot of times, we've done this workshop last fall, and we're doing this workshop now. And we believe that healthy nonprofits make for good community enhancements, and so we're trying to make them have their work easier, and but also in compliance. And I think that since 9/11, and I think these two fellows would agree with me that since 9/11, the compliance has really stepped up quite a bit, in regards to accountability, more filing, and that type of thing. I know we've noticed it in the Austin Area Foundation, that we have a lot more filing requirements and so forth.
Steve Hovey, what about that? These are additional federal types of filings or restrictions?
Well, there certainly are many federal filings that you have to make. I think what Mike is talking about is the organizations, whether it's the IRS or attorney general's offices in various states, are watching nonprofits closer to make sure that they are operating correctly, that they are truly serving as public charities, that they are accomplishing the mission that they say they're trying to accomplish in exchange for receiving this status as a, let's say a 501c3 status. And so what they're looking at is to make sure that, for instance, the nonprofit is, there aren't conflicts of interests, where the nonprofit is set up and the money from this public charity is flowing to somebody who has a connection to the public charity. I mean, I'll give you an example. Let's say that you want to set up a nonprofit that is going to construct a public baseball diamond, and one of the leaders of this nonprofit, maybe the board president, just coincidentally happens to be a contractor, who builds baseball diamonds. And so the money from this nonprofit is going to the president's own pocket through his contracting business. Those types of conflicts, the IRS and the oversight agencies of the government are more cognizant of, to make sure that you avoid those as an organization. It's important that when you develop your organization, you have good rules in place, good conflicts disclosures in place, so that when you bring a board member on, that board member will disclose to you and the other board members that he or she may have a conflict because they happen to own this particular business that might be doing something for the nonprofit, or maybe this board member happens to be a board member for another nonprofit that's competing for the same money out there. So those are the things that you're looking for to just make sure that your nonprofit is operating kind of on the up and up, as I would say.
Sure. Well, Ron, are there words that you can use and have them written that can handle every possible conflict or situation, or is it pretty much common sense? I mean, that would seem to be a difficult task for a little nonprofit.
I guess for a small, basically any nonprofit, the most common words: conduct your operations and activity with integrity and ethically. And that should keep you out of trouble most of the time. Any common thing? No, there are too many regulations out there of what you can and can't do. Mm-hmm. And they change depending upon the 501c type of organization you are.
And it's important, I guess, just to think about it, like we're having this discussion now, to think ahead about these possibilities. In working with my audit, it's we do these things, we go through this exercise also just to have the leadership of the organization think about these types of scenarios. It's very helpful and really has to be done. Mike mentioned 9/11, and so along with the wanting to make sure that there aren't any conflicts, we also want to make sure that the organization is actually doing what it says it's doing and it's not doing something else. Is that captured in something like a mission statement? Is it that simple? Is that a legal, by the way, is that a legal requirement to have something called a mission statement?
No, you don't. An organization doesn't have to have a mission statement. What I think you would want is, you'd want to outline for your board members and your members and your volunteers and the people who are involved, what the core value or cause of the organization is. That's just a good practice, so that everybody knows, what's our target, what are we trying to accomplish here. There's no requirement that you adopt or create some sort of mission statement, but instead what you want to do is, I think you want to create for your board members, for your volunteers, expectations. What does it mean to become involved with our organization? What's expected of you as a volunteer or as a board member? And then follow through as an organization to make sure that they're meeting those expectations. Are they attending meetings? Do you expect your board members to contribute financially to your organization? do you expect them to show up at the fundraisers? Do you expect them to show up at workshops that you put on? Do you expect them to be there with shovel in hand, making repairs to the baseball diamond? So you want to set that out so that everybody knows what they're getting into when they join your organization, when they become a board member, when they become a volunteer, and then follow through to make sure that you meet them.
And what about when they want to be a contributor? Let's put it on the other end. If there's somebody in the community that wants to support financially an organization, is there anything, a Better Business seal or something? Or what do they look for as touchstones to know that this is probably an organization that's on the up and up?
Well, one of the things, of course, that I think people will look for or wonder about is, do you have 501c3 status? I don't think most people donate money to nonprofits because of the tax deductibility. I think they donate money because they believe in the cause or the mission of the organization. But when you have 501c3 status, that seems to be some sort of stamp of legitimacy. It's understood that at least the government recognizes that you are a public charity, that you have this status. But I think what you're looking for as an organization is you want to be prepared to represent to your donors that the money that they're donating to you is going towards the cause and not going just towards administration of your organization, not going to line somebody's pockets, that the money is being used for the cause that the donor expects it to be used for. And that's what you're trying to create in the donor's mind.
Boy, that's a challenge.
The general public has access to the required federal filings of these tax exempts through their website at irs.gov. Then you select just the exempt organizations. A copy of the entire Form 990, which outlines all of this, is available for public inspection.
And would that show to the level of detail about what Steve was saying about how much percentage is spent on administrative versus the actual charity or the cause at hand?
The dollar number's there because they have to file a statement of functional expense where it's broken down by administrative, fundraising, and program.
So it is.
And total, so you can see how the charity is spending it,
Okay.
and it even breaks it down more into specific categories.
I think one of the best things a nonprofit can do is get visibility as far as what their the cause is. Like the Austin Area Foundation. We were pretty new, and once we started to have distributions from our endowment fund, we tried to get some exposure in regards to those gifts to the other organizations. And that was accountability, but it was also visibility that the donor could see that we were actually doing something. And so I think as simple as that, it's very important, to do that sort of thing. The other thing too is that every donor get a thank you, and for any donation above $250, there is a responsibility to send out a gift receipt, and that gift receipt will state the amount and so forth, and that no goods or services were in lieu of this donation and so forth. And so that also is a level of legitimacy as far as the nonprofit organization.
Wonderful. Once again, we're watching Nonprofit No Problem from the Austin Area Foundation and KSMQ Public Television. Well, we learned a little bit about the Veterans Memorial Project, and now let's go into the field for another success story. We'll go to the Austin Dog Park. Holly Wallace was, and we should say also, and all of these folks, when we talked to them, said, it's not just me. We had a whole team of people who helped us along the way. So we thank these individual volunteers for coming forward and wanting to share their story of their nonprofit success story. Let's take a listen to Holly Wallace.
My name is Holly Wallace. I am a member of SPARK, which is Start a Park for Austin's Respectable Canines, and we are the organization that worked with the City of Austin to establish a public park as a place for people to bring their dogs. Well, one of the other things that surprised me that I didn't expect was how long it really takes from the initial idea of starting a project to forming that nonprofit to actually realizing the object of your goal to make a dog park in this instance. We did get kind of lucky in that we had some fencing donated to us, and again that came through with some of our networking and people knowing people, and maybe being in a smaller community too. Maybe it would translate to a large community as well, but yeah, you just have to have the perseverance and just, it feels like nothing's happening, and then boom, it happens.
And when I think about the dog park program, Mike, I'm reminded of what you just said about being out there in the community, telling your story and thanking people, because for that organization, just locally, I knew what was happening, and that there was this goal. There were frequent updates in the newspapers and on the television news. We knew there was a program afoot, and but it took time too. Both folks said that their biggest surprise was how long it took, the process to get it to fruition from just an idea. And Ron, she mentioned an in-kind donation. In her case, it was fencing. Holly's case was fencing. Are there any things that nonprofits need to be aware of when it comes to not a cash donation, but material, equipment, fencing, and the like?
Yeah, an in-kind donation is normally recorded on the organization's books at fair market value. And most organizations are not in the business of determining what that is, so often on the prize receipts or the gift receipts that Mike mentioned, they will leave that determination to the gifter.
What about labor too? If, say with the fence, some fella comes in and said, "I'll put it in for you." How do you account for that value? Same.
Do the same thing. Approximately what would it cost that organization to go out and hire that service to be done? And you get sort of a twofold effect of that, because number one, you get to record on your 990 the public report of what you've done. Your contribution is increased by the amount of that gift, and it also helps you by increasing your program expenses because you get to recognize the use of that material then. So it sort of shows an increase in the volume and activity of the organization.
So is it an overall, is it a better way to give to an organization because it shows more community involvement? If it's some kind of in-kind contribution, it shows that you're finding a different way and communicating with the community directly in this way, or it's really 6 of one, half dozen of the other?
Pretty much, except that it does put a second life into something that you've got around that you're not using, or maybe that it still works good, but you don't have a current purpose for it. Rather than letting it sit there and gather dust and turn rusty, give it to an organization that can put it to some good use.
What about, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm part of an organization that whenever we do a project, we get the determined cost of if a contractor did it from start to end, and therefore, when we have volunteers do the project, we pay something less than that, just the material cost. Well, that difference is the value of the volunteer work. And this organization has been able, over a period of years, has been able to show that for every dollar donated, there's $1.40 back of value to the community. And that does a couple of things. That is, it gives value to the volunteer work, and they feel like they're really accomplishing something, not only from the project, but they also put a value on that, dollar-wise. The hourly value of a volunteer is over $20 an hour. That's estimated by there's a national volunteer organization that puts a value on that. I don't know how they come up with it, but it's estimated at over $20. And so when you think about all the volunteers that make these nonprofits work, that's a tremendous value to the communities that they serve.
And that impacts the balance sheet or of the organization, that figure, or not?
Not really the balance sheet, but the income statement,
Okay.
because it shows more involvement, more activity by the organization in the community, by the income or the donation of that, as well as it turning around and spending that money back through. A little side report, even though the community and we as a nonprofit organization value volunteers very much, the IRS doesn't think much of it. There is no deduction for contributed labor. The IRS said you can only deduct your basis in that labor, which is what did you pay for it or lay out for it. And since you didn't buy your time from anybody, there is no tax deduction for donated labor.
What about the internet? We haven't really touched on that, and it's a huge, I know at KSMQ we have a website, we maintain it, and we will receive contributions from outside our area, from outside our state. We just recently had a tower, our tower came down and we have a fund set up, and we're getting contributions from outside our viewing area for that. Is there anything with regard to use of the World Wide Web and a nonprofit that folks need to keep in mind about?
Probably the easiest way to think of it is, we're down here in Austin, so we're 10 miles from the Iowa border. And if we're operating a nonprofit in Minnesota, then we have to make sure that we comply with the Minnesota rules and regulations with respect to public charities and nonprofit organizations. So think about, what if you physically went across the border and started soliciting money or holding fundraisers or conducting activities in the state of Iowa? I think most of us would assume we have to comply with Iowa's rules and regulations. Well, it's the same way with the internet. With the internet, that's just a very convenient way to cross borders. We're crossing not only state borders, but maybe even international borders with respect to our activities. And so yes, if you as a charitable organization are trying to solicit parties outside of the state of Minnesota, say in the state of Iowa or in California or wherever it may be, you have to be cognizant of the possibility that you are triggering a responsibility to comply with that state's laws. Now, what states have done is, I think perhaps a dozen years ago, I know there was a conference that involved the state leaders, the attorneys general from various states in the country got together and said, let's try to make our rules very similar so that charities that are operating nationwide or that are going across borders using the internet are complying with regulations that are close enough that if they're complying with their home state, they're probably complying with the other states. But it's something you have to think about. If you are specifically targeting people outside of your state or conducting activities outside of your state, or if you are receiving donations of a significant volume from outside of your state, you better be looking into what the regulations are in that state.
To include like being registered?
May very well include that, yep. Or there may be filing requirements in that state. That's what you have to find out is if you receive a $50,000 donation from somebody in the state of Iowa for your tower, or for the Austin Area Foundation, just because they may have had some connection, is there a requirement that that we have certain filings we have to conduct in the state of Iowa? That's exactly right.
So that $50 we got from North Dakota for the tower, I don't know what I have to do there.
$50, you're probably good, but
okay. Rod, what about the financial side? Is there anything about the World Wide Web that enters your sphere of expertise in counting?
Not really, except what Steve said, the fancy word, they call it nexus, or creating a presence in the state, even though it's over the internet, is the biggest risk you got on that. Other than that, you treat what you get from the internet like a contribution or funds received from whatever location that originated it.
Do most nonprofits have do they just exist on the web, or do most nonprofits have an actual business address with a brick and mortar front, and you walk in the front door and there they are?
I think a lot of nonprofits that I've been associated with and familiar with is that uh, they operate where whoever will let them in, and they they have to have a physical address, like for IRS forms and that type of thing. Usually they'll do a PO box for mailing and bills and that type of thing. But a lot of times, the files and treasurer's stuff is kept at somebody's house, and then they have a meeting place, but they have a PO box, and usually it's someone representing the organization whose name is on the registration or the IRS filing and that type of thing.
And if if you do have a location, Steve, you have to worry about or inform yourself about insurance, I would assume, and those kind of liability.
Sure, I suppose that it's the goal of every nonprofit to become successful enough that you'd have your own building and maybe be the American Red Cross and you have a physical presence in the community that people can drive past. But when you get to that point, if you get to that point, you have to treat it just as if you're any other business, for-profit business or otherwise. So you're going to have issues. Is there going to be a lease involved? Is there going to be a purchase or sale of the building? Do we have to insure the building for fire and flood and liability in case somebody walks in our front door and trips and falls? So yeah, when you get to the point where you actually have what they call a brick and mortar location, you have the same responsibilities and liabilities and exposure that any other building owner, any other business owner in town would have.
Let's go back out in the field right now, and literally in the field for this one. And for full disclosure, the fellow you're going to hear from, David Hagan, works here at KSMQ Public Television, but in some of his outside activities, he works for a national group, or volunteers for a national group, Pheasants Forever, and hasn't been involved in large nonprofit projects. Let's listen to his success story.
Hi, my name is David Hagan, and I'm with Mower County Habitat and Pheasants Forever. Our Pheasants Forever non-for-profit in Mower County was kind of grandfathered in through our national office in St. Paul, but what we had to do in the beginning was create a service board, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. So we had to find good, reliable people to do that. And then the next big challenge was fundraising. Starting a nonprofit for Pheasants Forever, it was a challenge. First of all, we had to get the right people in the right positions to make this thing work. And we didn't want it to just work for a little while. We wanted it to work for a long time. So we had to get some good people.
Pheasants Forever and big fundraising projects there. Now, we're not talking about David Hagan in this next question, of course, but what about volunteers that don't work out in an organization? Again, not talking about any of our volunteers that we featured in our program, but sometimes things don't work out as expected, or you have somebody who's causing problems. What do you do?
It's not an unusual situation, surprisingly. The problem volunteer, if you're a large enough organization or you're around long enough, you will probably face it. And the best advice that I can give organizations for the problem volunteers, you treat it like a problem employee. Even though they may not be an employee, they're not getting paid a wage, if you handle it the same way, you will handle it correctly and you will solve the problem. So what that means, going back to what I said earlier, when they become a volunteer, you need to establish what the parameters are for their involvement. What do you expect of them? How do you expect them to conduct themselves?
Should that be something in writing that you give them?
Absolutely. You should have conflict of interest policies. You should have a policy regarding, say, the use of social media, Twitter, Facebook, things like that, because you don't want your volunteers out there making statements on their Facebook page or on Twitter in which they purport to represent your organization, and they're making inflammatory or derogatory or inappropriate statements that now reflect poorly on your organization. So you should have a policy about what they can and cannot say on behalf of your organization and in what context. You spell all of that out at the beginning when they become involved, and then you evaluate them as they're going along. And if you determine that they are a problem volunteer, they're not living up to expectations, they're not providing the service that you expect of a board member or another volunteer, or they are creating problems for you, then like an employee, first thing you do is you'd sit them down, have a talk, explain, you kind of call it a verbal warning, so to speak. Look, this is unacceptable for our organization. This conduct has to change. Here's what we expect of you. Here's how we want you to change. If they change, then they are no longer a problem volunteer. If they don't change, then you have to go to the next step. Maybe you say, all right, we don't require your services anymore. Maybe you kind of suspend them or move them into a different area of the organization. But at the end of the day, if they don't work out, you have to sit down with them just like you would terminating an employee. The lead person for your organization and perhaps another witness should be there and explain why this is not working out, what went wrong, and that the decision of the organization is that their volunteer services are no longer required. Make sure you collect all of the organization's property that they might have in their possession and sever the relationship. So it's really, even though they're not an employee, I would handle it exactly like I would a problem employee.
I would just add to that by saying that I've always believed that the nominating committee is one of the most important committees any nonprofit organization can have. And that is, you go through a qualifying process. And this is what we expect of you, and so forth. So that if that individual then becomes an issue, about attendance or whatever, then you can go back and say, well, you knew the parameters and so forth, and is this going to change or not going to change? The bylaws also are going to address some of these issues. The bylaws, a lot of organizations, when they have new people, they don't require them to really look at the bylaws. And good bylaws have, provisions as far as you need to attend a certain amount of meetings. And if you don't, the chairperson is going to discuss that with you and so forth. So I think there's a structure, nominating committee, laying out the parameters, policy manual, bylaws, and so forth, that you kind of have as a foundation for then future discussions, as far as the issue,
What about paying volunteers if they're doing work or service for the organization or in some kind of ongoing financial arrangements? It's probably quite a challenge, Ron. Any recommendations along those lines?
Well, once you start paying somebody for delivery of service, they're no longer a volunteer. They become basically your employee. As such, you're subject to all the reporting and taxes involved with an employee.
Even if what if they're doing a particular task or a job that has a beginning and an end?
Now you're reaching into that area of, are they an independent contractor or not? If they are truly an independent contractor, they're doing this, they're running a business doing that same type of activity, and then you've got some different rules. If they are not doing this, even if they're just doing, the old phrase used to be like day labor, technically they are an employee and should be covered.
And to that end, what about board members and so on, as far as covering them insurance-wise? Does a nonprofit need to, as you said, the problem employee, what if it becomes a situation where they get sued or something like that? Is that advisable?
Well, ideally, I guess, you'd like to have insurance if you can afford it. You can purchase policies that cover your board members, that cover volunteers. There are, both the state and the federal government want to promote people getting involved with nonprofits. They want to make it so that you feel like you can donate your service to these worthy causes without risking, everything that you've worked your life for and saved for. So there are laws that have been passed that provide certain immunities, certain exemption from liability for conduct or events that may occur. But as a board member, what you have to remember is you have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization. And what that means is you're there to look out for the best interests of the organization. And you need to act accordingly, vote accordingly, make decisions accordingly. It can't be in the best interest of you personally or your friend or your wife. It has to be in the best interest of the organization. And if you do that, then you don't face any liability risks. Then you are not going to be successfully sued for engaging in inappropriate behavior. If you're a board that doesn't put appropriate accounting controls in place, and so you've got somebody taking money that's being donated, if you as a board aren't doing any sort of oversight as to what's happening with that money or what's happening with the people who are handling it or who are out in the community, well, then you're not fulfilling your obligations, and there is a risk of liability to you. And ideally, you'd like to have insurance to cover it, but of course, the best method is just to make sure you're doing the job correctly to begin with.
And in just a couple minutes we have left, what about another liability from the volunteer standpoint? And the scenario I think about is, what if my son wants me to help coach the volunteer on the flag football team that's an organization, and anything I, as the person going into a volunteer situation?
Well, again, if they ask you to do it, you certainly should do it, because it's a worthy cause.
It's fun.
And that's right, and the likelihood of any bad things happening are pretty slim. But again, in Minnesota, you'd be fortunate, because in Minnesota, I believe that they have passed a law that says that people who volunteer for those types of athletic events, youth baseball and football and coaching and providing some medical assistance to these young athletes who may be injured, that you are immune from liability, that you have some protection from liability just through your volunteer service. And again, there are any number of different statutes that may operate to provide immunity or protection to volunteers, not just for the youth football one, but there is a specific statute actually in Minnesota for youth football. So,
and as we wrap up here, we've talked a lot about problems, scenarios, situations. Don't be dissuaded by that, because it's a wonderful thing to volunteer, and it makes our community stronger. To go through those maybe one or two bumps in the road, right, Mike, to start a nonprofit and help the region. Austin Area Foundation's there to help.
Well, that's right, and I think when people get the nonprofit going and they see their passion becoming a reality, some of these requirements and compliance issues take a back seat, and so forth. So I don't think anything we've talked about should be an issue as far as preventing someone to going with their compassion, to do good in the community.
And not insurmountable at all. Wonderful. Well, this has been just a fascinating discussion. I think we've learned a lot. I know I have, and I hope you have too. If you want more information, you can certainly contact the Austin Area Foundation for more information. Of the phone number and the web address on the screen here. I'd like to thank our guest, Steve Hovey, attorney from Austin. Thank you for your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
And Ron Wolf, CPA in Austin. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
And Mike Ruzek from Health Insurance Rep and from the Austin Area Foundation.
Thank you, Eric.
You bet. I'm Eric Olson. Thanks again for your time watching, and we'll see you again. Thanks for watching.